Just moments before the world would meet the new Pope, Cardinal Robert Prevost stood in stillness. But he wasn't alone. The great marble walls of the Sistine Chapel, silent witnesses to centuries of sacred turning points, held their breath. And in that silence, in that final second before history was written in white smoke, something eternal moved through the room. It wasn't seen, but it was felt. A presence, a holy weight that pressed into the hearts of the cardinals gathered. There, some called it divine pressure, others couldn't describe it at all. But Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle knew. He would later whisper to a trusted confidant, "Something entered the conclave, something not of this world." And his hands trembled as he spoke. This was no ordinary conclave. Not just because the eyes of the Church were searching for direction after Pope Francis. Not just because the world had grown restless and fractured, but because heaven itself was watching and intervening. What Cardinal Tagle saw that day would haunt and inspire him forever. Minutes before the final vote, he had left the chapel briefly, heart heavy with something unspeakable. He was praying, not for his own leadership, not even for clarity, but for mercy. Mercy upon the Church. Mercy upon the man who would wear the weight of Peter's keys next. And just as he whispered that final Amen, a chill went down his spine. And a voice, not his own, whispered back, "He has been chosen." He returned to his seat, pale, eyes wide, staring at Cardinal Robert Prevost, who, in that moment, looked up, as if he'd heard it too. When the final vote came, and the name was read aloud, a tear slid down Cardinal Tagle's cheek. Not because he was surprised, but because it confirmed everything. Robert Prevost was now Pope Leo XIV, and behind those closed doors, before the cheers erupted in St. Peter's Square, before the world turned its gaze to the white smoke, Tagle witnessed something no one else would speak of publicly. He saw Pope Leo fall to his knees. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't even planned. But something overwhelmed him, something unseen. Pope Leo would later say he felt the presence of the one who called Moses from the burning bush, something ancient and powerful. He wept, not out of fear, but because in that moment he felt unworthy. And then he heard the voice. Only a few feet away, Cardinal Tagle heard it too. Soft, steady, unmistakable. "You are not chosen by men, but by me." The air changed. A breeze that came from nowhere stirred the crimson drapes. Several cardinals looked around. One clutched his rosary so tightly it broke. Another fainted. They later blamed the heat. But Cardinal Tagle knew better. This was the moment. The moment heaven touched earth in silence and fire. The throne of Peter, long awaited, was now filled by a man who, moments before, was called by name, not by the College of Cardinals, but by God. And yet, behind the holy awe of that sacred hour, a warning had already been delivered. Cardinal Tagle, weeks before the conclave, received an anonymous message sealed in white wax, bearing no signature. Just one sentence inside. "Prepare him. The war is not of flesh and blood," he thought. It was a prank, a dramatic flourish from a zealot, until a second message arrived, this time with a date, May 8th, the day the conclave ended, and scrawled in the margins, nearly illegible. "He will face resistance, even from within, but the dove has marked him." Tagle began to pray differently after that. He doubled his visits to the chapel. He fasted without telling anyone, and the night before the conclave, he sat alone beneath the stars and cried, not from fear, but from awe, because in his spirit, he knew what was coming, and he feared the world was not ready. Now, standing beside Pope Leo XIV as he received the ring of the fisherman, Cardinal Tagle's hands shook. He looked the new pontiff in the eyes, and something passed between them, a quiet understanding, a divine burden, because what they both knew in the depths of their souls, was this: God had spoken. And now the church would be shaken. But not. Everyone rejoiced. Within hours of the white smoke, murmurs began to rise. Certain factions inside the Vatican, those known only in hushed whispers, were displeased. Pope Leo's record of defending the victims of Sodalitium Christianae Vitae had already put him at odds with many. His stances on migration, on economic justice, on environmental care, all seen as dangerous by those who preferred silence and power. They saw Pope Leo not as a shepherd, but as a disruptor, and now he had the chair of Peter. The rumors started quickly. Some said the conclave had been manipulated. Others insisted Leo was a transitional pope, a placeholder, easily controlled. But they were wrong, because that same night, Pope Leo XIV summoned his closest confidants, and among them, Cardinal Tagle. What they discussed remains sealed, but insiders say the Pope shared a vision, something he had seen moments after the voice called his name. A vision so vivid, so piercing, it left him speechless for nearly 30 minutes. He simply held his head in his hands and wept. What did he see? Only a few know, but Cardinal Tagle, still visibly shaken days later, told a journalist off the record. It was a warning, a map, and a promise. Heaven didn't just call him, it showed him what's coming. He refused to say more. But here is what we do know. Pope Leo has begun preparing documents, sending silent envoys, and reassigning key positions. Some say he's consolidating power. Others say he's defending the church from something darker. One Vatican insider whispered, he's not building walls, he's digging up old ones. And Cardinal Tagle? He's never left the Pope's side since that day, because he knows what the others don't. He knows what God said first. The Vatican clock struck midnight, but the lights in the Apostolic Palace remained burning. Outside, Rome slept beneath the moonlight, unaware of the tremor rippling through the Holy See. Inside, Pope Leo XIV sat alone in his private chapel. No entourage, no ceremony, just him and the flicker of a single candle. His breathing was shallow. The weight of Peter's mantle had descended like thunder on his shoulders. And though he wore white, he felt the gravity of crimson, the blood of the martyrs, the blood of truth. The silence in the room was not empty. It throbbed with divine presence. He clutched an old rosary, not gold, not ornate, but worn, cracked, and darkened by decades of faithful hands. It had belonged to a priest who died in exile, martyred for protecting children in a war-ravaged village. Pope Leo kept it with him always. That night, the beads burned in his palm. He whispered prayers not from the missal, but from the depths of his own breaking heart. Domine, quid vis me facer? Lord, what do you want me to do? Behind him, a door creaked open. No footsteps, just presence. Cardinal Tagle entered, not as a dignitary, but as a brother. He didn't speak. He simply knelt beside him. They prayed together, tears silently falling onto marble, and then Pope Leo broke the silence. They will come, he said, voice trembling. They will accuse, divide, twist, but the warning is real. I saw the fire. I saw the tearing of the veil. Tagle looked up, heart pounding. What veil? He asked softly. Pope Leo's eyes, glowing with a strange fire, met his. The one inside the church. There was a pause, not out of confusion, but recognition. Because Cardinal Tagle had seen it too. Not in a vision, but in real life. For years he'd watched the rot beneath the polished surface. Secret orders, hidden documents, the strange alliances between princes of the church and shadows that called themselves faithful. Tagle had seen the money flow like poisoned rivers, laundering more than wealth, laundering guilt. He had tried to speak, tried to warn, but every time a wall rose before him. Now, under Pope Leo, those walls were beginning to crack. But with that crack came danger. The next morning, news reached the Vatican that shocked the inner circle. A sealed dossier, over 300 pages, was anonymously delivered to the Dicastery for Doctrine of the Faith. Inside were names, dates, hidden financial trails, evidence of clandestine meetings in secret monasteries. It implicated figures no one dared whisper about in public, some still wearing red hats. On the final page, handwritten in Latin, were 5 words: "He was warned. So were you." Tagle froze when he read it. It matched the handwriting of the letter he received weeks before the conclave. Someone was watching. Someone within the church was sending signals, not to threaten, but to awaken. That same afternoon, Pope Leo called for a private gathering, just 7 trusted cardinals. No press, no minutes, no assistants. Among them, Cardinal Tagle, Cardinal Zuppi, Archbishop Fernandez, and an unknown Eastern Rite bishop flown in quietly from Lebanon. They entered a room beneath the Apostolic Palace. Few know it exists. A vault of ancient records, sealed by 6 popes. Here, Pope Leo placed the dossier on the table. He didn't speak at first. He simply made the sign of the cross. Then he said, "If we open this, there's no going back." One by one, the cardinals nodded. When they broke the seal, a thick silence overtook the room. As they read, breaths caught. Faces turned pale. Some crossed themselves repeatedly. One wept, because the document didn't just name men, it named rituals. Shadows, things that happened in the name of faith, but were never of God. And on the final page was a chilling prediction. A schism. Not in decades, not in centuries, within the year. Suddenly, the election of Pope Leo XIV wasn't just a surprise to the world. It was an interruption, a divine detour, because whoever compiled that document, they knew something. They had planned for another candidate to win, and it wasn't Pope Leo. There had been meetings, promises, secret retreats in Alpine monasteries, and a name kept surfacing in redacted pages. A name circled in ink with one word beside it, fallback, Pope. Leo looked at Tagle. "They didn't expect me to win." Tagle, stunned, whispered, "They didn't want you to." And now, the ones who had lost were realigning. Quietly, swiftly, dangerous alliances forming again, not just in Rome, but across global dioceses. Power structures untouched for centuries now began to panic, because Pope Leo was beginning to move. The next day, without any public announcement, he removed 3 Vatican officials. Then, he reassigned another, not to a new office, but to a mission in the Philippines, under Cardinal Tagle's direct supervision. Whispers flew, telegrams lit up between European curial offices. A chill of holy fear spread across those who had once believed the papacy could be steered like a ship in calm waters. But Pope Leo had no intention of sailing calm seas. He was preparing for war, not against flesh, not against people, but against the spirits of corruption, cowardice, and compromise that had embedded themselves like mold beneath the marble. At the end of the week, he called Cardinal Tagle again. "I want to show you something," he said. They entered the apostolic archives. And there, beneath centuries of dust, the Pope unveiled a letter never seen by the public. It was from an old mystic nun, dated 1833. Her words were eerily precise, a prophecy of a pope who would rise from the Americas, wearing humility like a crown, and would walk alone into the temple to purge it. The last line read, "He will be hated by the powerful, and known by the weeping of the people." Cardinal Tagle's hands trembled, and then Pope Leo turned to him. "They warned you first, because they knew I'd listen to you." There was no pride in his voice, only fear, holy fear. Not of death, not of scandal, but of failing the one who had whispered in that sacred hour, "You are not chosen by men, but by me." And now, The real battle was about to begin. Outside the Vatican walls, the world remained distracted. Wars, elections, scandals, financial chaos. The faithful lit candles in cathedrals, oblivious to the tempest brewing inside the heart of the church. But within the marble corridors of Rome, where centuries of history echoed through gilded ceilings, something ancient was awakening. The Pope had begun praying in Latin again, not out of tradition, not out of style, but because the words felt older, heavier, as if heaven heard them louder in that sacred tongue. His private secretary noticed the change. Leo XIV now spent hours in the chapel alone, often in tears, often gripping that broken rosary until his fingers bled. He wasn't just praying. He was interceding. Something was coming, and he was pleading with heaven to hold it back. Then, at exactly 3 a.m., the hour of mercy, a message arrived. Not by email, not by courier, but by hand. A nun from a cloistered convent in Avignon appeared at the Vatican gates, escorted by 2 unknown priests. They carried a sealed envelope, marked with the personal seal of St. John Paul II, one believed lost after his death. Security was called. Protocol suspended. The Pope was awakened. He opened the letter alone. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was his own. But he had never written it. It was dated May 8, 1981, the day Pope John Paul II survived an assassination attempt. Inside were only 9 words. He who bleeds for the truth must be warned. Pope Leo sat in silence. His hands shook. Tagle was called instantly. Together, they locked the letter in a drawer no one else could access. And Pope Leo said the words that would change the Vatican forever. Tagle, they know I'm alive. And then, the first death occurred. An archivist. Young, brilliant, loyal, assigned to digitize forgotten Vatican files deep beneath the library. His body was found slumped over a centuries-old manuscript, eyes wide open, no signs of struggle. But his fingernails were missing. Officials declared it a stroke, but Cardinal Tagle didn't believe it, especially when he saw what the archivist had been translating, a forgotten prophecy from a 12th century Irish bishop. A prophecy describing a pope from the land of eagles whose tears would crack the pillars of Rome. That same week, 3 senior officials resigned without explanation. A 4th left for medical leave and was never seen again. Rumors surged like wildfire. Whispers about the Order of the Veil, an ancient secretive fraternity believed to have existed since the days of Constantine. Most considered it myth, until now, because Pope Leo had just received a gift. It came without sender, wrapped in black velvet. Inside, a single iron ring, engraved with words in Aramaic, and beside it, a card. No name, just one sentence. The veil remembers, and it watches. Leo's face went pale. Tagle immediately summoned 2 trusted Jesuits to analyze the ring. What they found was chilling. The Aramaic phrase translated to, "Woe to the shepherd who sees but does not cry out." This wasn't a warning, it was a judgment. The Pope was being watched, not just by cameras, not just by critics, but by something older, something hidden. An invisible priesthood operating behind the crimson curtain of centuries. But Leo
XIV didn't run. He doubled down. He restructured internal Vatican audits.
He released funds to rebuild abuse survivor shelters in South America. He ordered all Vatican bishops to submit sworn statements of conscience regarding past cover-ups, something no pope had ever dared. And then, he shocked the church. He announced a closed-door synod, not on doctrine, but on the sins of silence. The theme was simple. What has been hidden will now be brought to light. Immediately, resistance exploded. Several bishops boycotted. Threats were leaked to media outlets. Whisper campaigns against Pope Leo's past, his ties to certain liberation theology circles, his unconventional methods. Some even questioned his mental stability. But those who had stood in the chapel that night, they knew he was not unstable. He was anointed. Even Pope Francis, now in quiet retirement, broke his silence. In a rare message delivered by his secretary, he said, "Leo has been called by the wind. You may not understand his path, but it is not for understanding. It is for obedience. Do not stand against him." The message was ignored by many, but Cardinal Tagle heard it, and he wept. Because only weeks ago, before the conclave began, Tagle had dreamed of wind, not normal wind, but a roaring gust that shook the bones of St. Peter's Basilica. In the dream, statues cried blood, and in the center, a voice boomed, "If they silence my lion, I will cry out from the stones." Now it was all becoming clear. This was not politics, this was prophecy, and prophecy was bleeding into real time. The city of Rome moved as always, mopeds echoing through cobbled alleys, tourists tossing coins in fountains, lovers whispering beneath lamplights. But just beneath the surface, the Vatican groaned. The air inside, the curia felt thick, as though something vast and invisible was pressing down. A priest collapsed during Mass at Santa Maria Maggiore. He had just finished reading from Ezekiel when he dropped the Bible and screamed. Witnesses claimed he shouted the word anathema before convulsing. Emergency reports said cardiac arrest. But one nun, trembling as she recounted what she saw, insisted his eyes turned white for 3 full seconds, just like the statue of St. Michael behind him, which she swore began to weep. That same hour, Pope Leo XIV received a call from Jerusalem. It wasn't planned. It wasn't expected. It wasn't human. The Vatican's encrypted phone lines lit up with an unknown frequency. No number. Just a pulse. A rhythm. Like breath. And when the Pope lifted the receiver, he heard only one thing. Sandal steps. On. Stone. Approaching. Then silence. Technicians traced the signal. It came from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where no phones were used, no calls were made, no one had entered or exited for the past hour. Until suddenly, the bells rang on their own. Cardinal Tagle, pacing in the hallways that evening, stopped in his tracks. He had been praying the sorrowful mysteries, but he couldn't finish. His rosary snapped in his hands. And in the dead quiet of the corridor, he heard a child's voice echo from nowhere. "He already walked among you, but you did not recognize him." Tagle fell to his knees, and that night, thunder rolled over the Vatican. No rain, no lightning, just the sound. A trembling in the heavens. Then came the leak. A journalist from a major European outlet, anonymous, shielded, exiled, published a file. It was grainy, black and white footage from inside the Sistine Chapel during the final conclave vote. Forbidden, illegal, unthinkable. But what it showed, the cardinals all seated, the ballots cast, and then white smoke began to rise before the final count, a full minute too early. The chimney stirred before the ballots were burned, before the votes were read. Before Leo XIV's name had even reached the threshold. The implication was clear. Heaven moved before man. It wasn't a vote. It was an intervention. The church exploded. Conspiracy theories erupted. Claims of divine tampering, of rigged ballots, of supernatural manipulation. But those closest to the Pope knew the truth. This wasn't a conspiracy. This was prophecy catching up to the present. And yet, the final blow hadn't landed. Not yet. Then came the twist. A letter arrived at the Vatican. Hand-delivered by the same nun from Avignon, only this time she didn't speak. She simply collapsed at the Pope's feet. No pulse, no cause, dead on arrival, clutching a blood-stained envelope. Inside were 2 things, a photo and a death certificate. The photo, an old weathered image from 1978, black and white. It showed a young seminarian in Chicago, smiling in front of a church. A boyish Robert Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, and beside him, another boy, smaller, smiling, holding his hand. The name scribbled on the back: Luisito A. Tagle, Cardinal Tagle. The two had known each other as children. The Pope stared at the photo for a long time. Something in him cracked. He whispered, "I don't remember this. I don't remember." And then the second item, the death certificate. It was dated March 23, 1979. Name, Luis Antonio Tagle. Declared deceased at age 21, Place Manila. The certificate was signed by an archbishop. Official, stamped, sealed. But how could that be? How? Could Cardinal Tagle be dead? How could the man standing beside the Pope have been buried 46 years ago? Suddenly, the pieces shifted. The warnings, the dreams, the unexplainable, the letters with no sender, the knowledge no one else could have had, the voice that whispered before the vote, the he who would be known by weeping, but whom the world would not recognize. Pope Leo dropped the certificate and turned to find Tagle, but he was gone, not in his room, not in the chapel. Gone. His vestments were folded on the bed, his crucifix left on the table, his phone off. Security cameras blank. He had vanished, just like the child's voice had said. He already walked among you. The Vatican went into full lockdown. The press was told nothing. And Pope Leo? He hasn't spoken publicly since. Only one entry was recorded in his personal journal that night, a single sentence. Was I anointed by the living or chosen by the dead? The war has only just begun.